So my intention actually is not to present. I just have one set of just provide a bit of an update to what we've been doing on MANRS. So I think it will look very similar to what Yuri has spoken about, what Adil has spoken about with respect to the measurements and statistics to see what's really going on. And on MANRS, one of the goals of MANRS was to also just have a way of measuring once we have subscribers or people who actually sign up to MANRS, whether they're actually following up to sustain those actions. So maybe before just going into the details, how many of you have heard of MANRS before today? How many have not heard of MANRS? Yes. So MANRS stands for Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security. Basically, this is a set of actions that have been agreed upon by various operators. There are 4 key main actions that operators need to implement to improve routing security over the internet or on the internet. And basically, the 4 actions are filtering, protection against spoofing, providing information that will help improve the overall communications, and then implementation of routing information that can be validated to help improve on the router security. So there are 4 key actions. 2 are technical in nature, that they actually need to go into their routers and do configurations, and 2 means they need to provide information through the various platforms or mechanisms that exist to help improve on the routing security, like going to PRMDB or the IRR routing registries, and also implementing things like RPKI and ROAS and so on. So this initiative started really as an ISOC initiative, but there was input that was received that being an ISOC initiative, there was very little community ownership, or there was no community ownership in the process, and so there was a need to actually take this back to the community, which was approached in the initial phase of developing the MANRS actions. So we have then taken note of that input, and we started a process to actually take MANRS to the community. So you see MANRS today, you will see it's very independent from ISOC in terms of the branding, how everything is conducted. There is a small group of people that actually make decisions around all the MANRS, like decisions and actions that are made or are taken. And that group of people comes from the community. Developing of future MANRS areas of work, for instance, the work on MANRS for IXPs, actually involved bringing all the IXPs together. We started at the regional level, so there was a discussion in Africa, there was a discussion in Latin America, Europe, among the IXPs, and to agree what kind of MANRS actions that they were comfortable in implementing, how we would frame them. And then there was one final meeting that was held where we brought in all the main IXPs that were able to attend that meeting, both in person and remotely, and they agreed on the 5 actions that the IXPs need to implement, and decided what is the minimum requirement that you as an operator need to actually implement before you are considered for MANRS, for IXPs, and also for service providers. And now there's a new discussion that's going to be taking place for content distribution networks. So the CDNs will also be going through a similar process, because they feel that their networks are somewhat different from service providers and equally very different from IXPs. So their MANRS actions will likely be very different, or well, somewhat different from the other 2 groups. So that discussion has started. Hopefully by later this year or sometime in Q1, of 2020, we'll see a new category of MANRS for CDNs. So as a result of that, yes, I want to check something. As a result of that, one of the things that we noted and which was observed is that whenever we get a network that subscribes to MANRS, and because there are two actions, so there's the actions which is more documentation, the other one they actually need to maintain proper filtering. We had one incident where one network that was subscribed to MANRS then leaked information, or rather leaked prefixes, and so the question was, how do we monitor and ensure that a network that has actually subscribed to MANRS is, consistent with with what they've said they will do by signing up to the MANRS actions. And so one of the things that came through was we need a way of being able to monitor those networks, monitor all networks, and also those that have subscribed to MANRS are being able to see what's really going on. So part of that has included the development of what we are calling the MANRS Observatory. And so the MANRS Observatory is ready. It is currently going through, again, given that it's a community-driven initiative, the community has time to review this, especially the MANRS members. They have been given access to this system, to the observatory, to log in and see what's really good, what's the data we are using. Is it accurate enough? Is it a good reflection? And so on and so forth. So, so at present, what it's doing is it's able to keep track of the incidents, who are the culprits, and the routing completeness, and also from an IRR point of view, and also from an RPKI point of view, and also providing some statistical graphical data. But you can also be able to dig into this data. Now, we are using publicly available sources for this data. So we are using the data from KIDA, we are using data from BGP Stream, we're using data from BGP reports, that's just BGP updates, and so on. So all that data is collected. There's a company that actually does the processing of this data, so that helps us visualize this. A bit of the data is normalized, and there's quite a bit of discussion around how the data is normalized. Looking at, or rather hearing what Yuri was saying about the normalization of data. We've gone through some iterations in how we've normalized the data. And so I'll invite you to look at under the about section is a bullet about how we, or rather a page entirely about how the data has been normalized to see how that data determines that whether you're a culprit and why you're rated in the way that you're rated based on how many incidents you had and how long those incidents lasted. So anything that's less than 5 hours is given 0.5. Anything that's under 24 hours is given 1. Anything more than 24 hours is given 2. So depending on that, then the totals are added, and that's how we try to normalize, because the incidents tend to be too many. And so it's based on the time, the period that the incident has occurred. So very interestingly, I just chose to pick Africa and aggregate African networks. 68 rootlets. Again, there is an issue with how often we can. So most data is done by month. So here on this one, you see up to the end of May. So we don't have June data yet. So you see there were 68 incidents. 23 ASNs were largely responsible for those kind of incidents. You can see the routing completeness in terms of how many networks are announcing information based on the RIR, and how many networks are using RPKI. As you can see, only 2% of the networks are preparing and 8% are not, and so on and so forth. So, and you can go through the various sections of where you have the history, the details, comparison, and so on. So you can compare with historical data and from previous months and so on. And in the details, you are able to actually you're able to go deep into which networks were actually responsible for some of those. And also, without looking at regional data, you can also just type the ASN and you can see how that ASN performed for that particular one. So it's interesting data. I think it helps us get better visibility of how the networks are performing. Again, we're looking across all networks, but for MANRS members, again, we're able to compare them individually and see whether they're living up to the expectations of the MANRS agreement. So with that, I want to stop there. And then I did invite a couple of people to the room, the MANRS members, and also actively involved in the community in sort of like trying to promote the uptake of good best practices with respect to routing security. So I want to just invite them for a brief discussion with respect to what's theirs. First, I'd like to start with the networks that have implemented MANRS and say, or rather ask, what led them to actually sign up to MANRS? What are the challenges they've been facing since they did implement? And basically what they think is the next step that we need to be taking in the region to get more networks to subscribe to MANRS. So with that, I think I have work online, Michelle at the back, and Noah. So maybe you could take the question and give us a quick response in terms of what has been your experience so far. You did make an announcement, I think, in April that you're going to be dropping invalids. What kind of network effects have you seen as a result of making that decision? And where do you think what do you think the future looks like?
All right. Thank you, Michuki. Well, so we have a structured internal routing policy.
What is your AS number, please?
AS 37100, which is SIGA. So yeah, like I was saying, we had an internal policy which we had to update. It's a structured routing policy. And then the idea was for us to start complying with MANRS members. And in the process, technically, obviously, we implemented things like URPF and when we also to comply with PCP date. And above that, we obviously started also looking at deploying and implementing RPKI in the network, which we did. And we have some validators in the network. And we work online with a bunch of other operators. A couple of months, I would say last year, sat together and decided that we should actually now, consider really practically going to deploying, starting to validate and dropping invalids. So as far as ECOM is concerned, what we've done in phase one was to start with our peering and border infrastructure because we wanted to see what the impact would be. And when we started doing that, what we observed in the past couple of months is starting to drop invalids is that we had customers who have tried to reach specific destinations. Then we find that these specific destinations, of course, are not in compliance. Then we drop those services, and then, of course, customers reach out to us to find out why there is problem them with those specific destinations. And what we've done now is to engage those remote or destinations to see if they can fix their RPKI implementation, which obviously has required a dedicated team, the peering team, to push. And we've had feedback, positive feedback. In fact, most of the customers who had problems started doing this have enabled, those complaints have enabled us to also log in and push those destinations to comply with the implementation of RPKI. And with this, of course, we are seeing a much healthier internet routing system. And of course, the other thing is that the real impact to us is we had a situation whereby there was something that seemed like a possible hijacking of the previous. But because of this implementation, we were able to pick it up. And this happened on one of the exchange points which we are peering at. And yeah, the implementation enabled us to basically avoid that situation. That is include what we basically see. We started doing this. But overall, of course, our intention is to make sure that we comply with MANRS and ensure that the internet routing system is much more clean and, of course, have a secure internet.
So I have a question. How many of your peers have actually, between April and today, do you know what percentage of your peers have actually been able to implement ROAS as a result of your action?
Yes, I don't have the exact statistics, but we've seen a bigger percentage, especially in the Southern Africa. We saw a very big percentage of peers within the Southern Africa. Of course, for the European peering infrastructure, most of them have been doing this. And one of the exchange points already follows, I think, follows MANRS, the AM6. So most of the peers of the AM6 infrastructure already ROA and validate their stuff. But within Africa, it's mostly seeing a lot of peers within the Southern Africa region. But I don't have the exact numbers. But I would say that a big percentage are now doing it, including our own customers are taking it up.
Okay. Yeah. Michelle?
Can everyone hear me?
Oh, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question for CCOM. I had a question for CCOM. So, what are your motivations? What motivate CCOM to join MANRS? What is the motivation beyond the technical? So, maybe helping the internet routing. So, do you have other motivation? Can you share so that we know what because I need to convince the policymakers.
Well, first is of course, we don't want our own prefixes to be hijacked. Okay, neither do we want other people's prefixes to be hijacked. I think that is the main motivation. The other motivation is believe strongly in a more secure internet. So, I mean, it's not just the technique. We also have some belief systems. And of course, the main thing is we don't want to see our own prefixes being hijacked or our own customers being hijacked or us being part of the problem. Yeah.
It's a question?
Yes, sir. Okay. I don't know whether you can help us if the mentions of challenges.
Yes, so in terms of challenges, same for the fact that we've had customers screaming at us when the country gets specific destination and then we have to engage. So the main challenge is engaging the destination, which is not validating or which has implemented RPK, but obviously probably the implementation is somehow not proper. So reaching out, finding, contacting the network, the destination network to fix their to ROA and of course the implementation has been the main challenge. So now what that does is that the customer now becomes impatient because then what do you do? You see? So this is why actually we decided to go with only our peers, the peering infrastructure and the border. We've not actually started doing this with our own customers because that is in our phase 2. So phase 1, we're just dealing with the public peers and then action providers. So as we learn, then of course we'll go pop and then for the customers. So of course, I'm sure become raised.
Right. Michelle?
Michelle from AS 3721. Yes, so we are strong commitment for MANRS that we can having all of the policy documents for caption, because as a transit provider, you're dealing with all these rules that they're going through your life. We want to make sure that the only transit actual value is the actual value destination. So before IPI implemented the network, as well as strict object evaluation. So all our customers, all our peers, all our clients have said that use that actually existing in one of the our databases, some kind of root object category before the mistake. So in our implementation of IPI, we turned on for both our customers as well as our peers and customers. So we turned on IPI. Actually, we did have an incident where we initially turned it on because we're using Cisco iOS and Cisco iOS XP had some really weird behavior with their implementation of IPI. So when we initially turned it on, we wanted to have IPI on. Let's check your value for it. You weren't trying to help any purposes or anything. Just wanted to have our business check the availability of the mechanism, whether we have to cover for us. But with this implementation, what happened was all the prefixes that we were receiving from those were being evaluated. And it was able to tell which prefixes are valid, which ones are invalid, which are not. But for the IDDB, it wasn't on by default. So it was everything that your IDDB neighbor said is actually valid, whereas some could have been invalid, essentially. And with that behavior, because we have multiple locations, most prefixes in more than one location, it's routers were receiving these prefixes, evaluating them, some of them are invalid. But when we were transmitting them in the IDDB, they were valid. So even invalid prefixes became viewed as valid. So for our router, with the IDDB get an IDDB session, they see, oh, okay, so I have a destination, I have a best map via my IDDB. Yeah, right? And this ended up creating some routine on the network that actually caused quite a significant contribution for us. So that was one of the issues we faced with the initial. So to fix that, you actually need to turn on extended community so that it can transmit the validity of our payments via those communities. And that's such a problem for us. In terms of our issue system, I haven't had any tickets for customers complaining that they can't get to the destination because of the lower value. Yeah. So we still haven't had a lot more dealers in our talk because of time. So far, it's been fun.
I see. Another question.
Yeah, here's a hard question, just a clarification question, because I hear and you Noah said it, look like you're talking about valid and invalid. But here, especially when we talk about RPTI, there is a not found, and the large group is inside the not found. And I assume that you are taking the not found as valid, right?
Yes, for us, we know valid and not found.
Valid, yes.
So that's so thank you for that background. Now I want to pick on something that Noah mentioned with respect that you're seeing a lot of ROAs being signed from South Africa. I also noted the same. I don't know whether there's someone from Africa someone from Africa earlier to just let us know what they're seeing. But I observed that in the month of April, there was the highest growth in terms of the number of rowers. And I was trying to identify what really happened. So I reached out to Africa to get some of the data. Also reached out to some of the people that I know in South in addition to the two statements from CCOM and Work Online, who have a huge presence in South Africa, I wanted to know what's really going on with the community, because those were a huge number of rowers within a very short time. And maybe Nishal can just talk a little bit more about what's really happening there and why are we seeing this huge upsurge in the number of rowers from South Africa, being an operator there as an exchange point operator, and what's really happening in that community.
This is okay, right? Hi, my name is Michuki. I work for Packet Clearing House, so I'm glad you saw data early on. But I also run 3 community-run internet exchange points in South Africa. Michuki wants me to talk about rowers, okay?
But not the rowers, but what's the community? What's happening in the community?
So as I said, I run the community-run exchange points, and by virtue of the fact that it's a community exchange, we tend to want to do things that the community has asked us for. Over the last few months, I guess, RPKI has become a sexy topic for probably all the wrong reasons. And what we've been doing is to debunk this myth that RPKI is sexy. So we've been holding training sessions in my country. Actually, we started last year. We started working with one of the local NOG teams to get them to understand that there's nothing fancy or special about RPKI and how to use RPKI and how to make use of the internet routing registries on a more effective basis. As an exchange point operator, we've been dropping routes that were not in an internet routing registry for longer than I can remember. And earlier this year, we decided that we would also start dropping RPKI invalid routes as well. But because we thought it was irresponsible to do anything without doing training, we've been running training sessions. So we've been going around the country, circling the 3 large cities, I guess, doing multiple training sessions with the guys to get them to understand that this is how you fix your internet routing registry entries. So we spent a lot of work, a lot of time working with folks to understand. And I'm really pleased that one of the things that has come out of that is that Afrinic has spent considerable time improving their documentation and feedback that has come out of our workshop. So we think that members have been finding it difficult to do this. Here's what we think we should do in documentation. And Afrinic actually now have a really nice cheat sheet. I don't think they've made it available yet, but I expect that they will after this meeting, after they get it validated by the DB working group. So that's good. That's good for the community, I think. We started dropping invalids, I think, for a month. 2 weeks ago. And I'm very pleased to say that there's no impact. Because what we did, as part of this was obviously upgrades and monitoring and all of that. So we started identifying which service providers had invalids, and actually there were quite a few. I think it was because people got into this, so they got into their heads that RPKI is something we should be doing. So they all went off and generated rowers, and then they did the wrong things with those rowers, and then they were invalid for a long time. And because nobody was doing anything about it, we had all of this invalid information. So we went through a lengthy process. It was about a month or so after the training session of reaching out to folks and saying, so you have an invalid, this is what it means, and this is what's going to happen. So we worked through quite a few, actually, and the NIST guys, I think the NIST guys have a nice report where they show you all the invalids of South Africa. They haven't updated it as of April, which means it still has all of the old data. So it shows, for example, the ASNs that had like 30 or 40 different invalids, and all of them been cleaned up. At the end of the exercise, when we finally flipped a bit to say large community support, enable RPKI invalids, there was one network with 3 invalids. And that network can't revalidate those rowers because they have an internal counting issue that is outside the scope of what we can expect. So I'm pleased to say we switched it on, there were no complaints, nobody noticed anything, and a week later we switched on the second round server, and it's been working as expected. I've gotten 0 complaints, which is kind of thing that you absolutely want to hear. Yeah, so I would say if you're thinking about doing this, the first thing is education within your community. It certainly has worked out well for us. As a consequence of us telling people that RPKI is not sexy, we've seen exactly what Michuki has described, that they've tried to get ROAS in place, because they understand that it's not something that's difficult to do, it's not something that's complicated, and it's something that maybe they should get good. I think most of the ROAS, if you do analysis, all have lifespans of about 15 years, and all support up to 8024 and 8048, which I maintain is incorrect. Hey, as long as they do what they feel they're comfortable with. And it's, I guess, making the numbers look good. Happy to take questions.
Any questions for Michelle? All right, thank you, Michelle.
I think just one question. You already hinted to it. Having implemented MANRS that leads to less complaints.
So to be clear, we did not implement MANRS. We don't actually support it. We have a completely different version of it that we do ourselves. And that's a long story that we want to discuss later. I think MANRS is not strict enough. So because we've been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time, our community is used to us being sort of autocrats in how we want them to do things, but they also respect why we're autocrats in the way we want to do things. So it's not enough to say you shouldn't do this. I mean, we found that after years and years of operation. The Jinx is 23 years old this year. So we've always found that it's worth our time to sit down with our community and say, this is what we're doing and why we are doing it. And that has been our approach. And through all of this, we've had 0 complaints. I think the only response we had on the mailing list is Mark from CCOM, who's going, thanks. And to be honest, that's exactly the kind of comments that I want to see, where somebody says, we don't notice anything, and let us continue as normal. So if you're an exchange point here and you want to do the same, I'm very happy to share our process, our tests, our scripts, and stuff with you. Everything we do is community-based. We're 100% open about stuff. All of that is available to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. So just a quick, rather last comment that I'd like to invite someone else from an exchange point. Again, as Michelle said, MANRS may not appeal to everyone, but it doesn't mean the MANRS actions that need to be done are not appealing. It's just the whole packaging of MANRS that may not be appealing to everyone, which is fine. So some exchange points are actually doing something, and I wanted to invite Frank from Tanzania just to tell us what they're really doing to improve the hygiene, the routing hygiene at the exchange point. Very similar to what Michelle is doing, but slightly different. And it's also an equally good approach to cleaning up the routing at the exchange. Frank.
Okay, hello, my name is Frank Habisch. The lake is 084, and at night it is the MAN1. It doesn't get internet exchange. So we are doing still less of the good things that Michelle is doing in South Africa. We are making just still manual and things like this. But one other thing I have recently started to maybe what we want to get to is that we've on the boot servers the peers are using, we are filtering out advertisements that have very implausible networks in the past, like the so-called global tier 1 providers that are operating globally that should not be customers of any of our peers at the Internet Exchange. So if those appear in the part of the advertisements, that's bad for the advertisement then. Other than that, we are following up whenever suboptimal routing is discovered, and trying to get them peers to get the one or the exchange.
No. What I thought was the innovativeness of thinking around why are we having certain situations occurring and thinking maybe we need to find a way of filtering this out. It's not in MANRS as an action, but it's just sort of like an advanced way of looking at how you filter and making sure that you're filtering beyond the scope of what MANRS has actually defined or any other and looking at your individual scenarios. So
it's called peer login, and it's documented on the NLog website, and it's now also maybe not even these days, it's also a default as part of IXP manager software for having IXP.
Yeah.
I have a question, please.
Yeah. That means that you're not using MANRS in your deployment right now.
We are not using
Well, so let's clarify. MANRS is a set of
We need to
actions.
clarify this.
Yes,
otherwise
yes, yes. So MANRS is a set of actions. So you implement those actions, and then you go to the MANRS website and say, I have implemented this action. We validate, and then we subscribe you as someone who's subscribing to the MANRS actions. Nishan is doing 70%, well, 110% of what MANRS does. But he's not come to the website and say, I am. And he's not going to do that. I don't expect him to do that. But he and I have a long discussion around it. But the point to make is that even without subscribing to MANRS, the objective here is more routing hygiene, more routing security being implemented. So whether they are subscribers of MANRS actions or not, there are networks who are actually doing this. And so the objective of this exercise, of this discussion, is to show that even what we have, and that's part of the reason why the measurement tool like the observatory is not just looking at MANRS subscribers only, it's looking across all the networks that are on the internet to see what's really going on. And those improvements will be noted. And as we see more, it means that there is some messaging getting out there with respect to routing security, not specific to MANRS, but the overall routing security.
Okay. Very much appreciate that. Also very much appreciate what you were telling. So there was a little confusion with MANRS or not, but what you were telling is exactly the thing that is so important to share. It's by being proactive to actually have effect. And that saves cost. It may help your reputation as a business. But I'm impressed by that. And the role ISOC is playing is to have you guys share this, to inspire others. I think this is exactly what we need to do. So thank you very much also for joining for that reason. I'd love to have the references to those two things you said. I'll include it in the report so other GFCA members as well as people here will read about it. I'm sorry. You don't have to. What's this?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.